Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, I hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. In this video, folks, we're going to talk a little bit about how people will test you with their baggage. I know, I don't know, not a spoiler alert, but be on guard because we might get into some territory here. Um, but Yeah, how do people test you with their baggage? Now, let me preface, we often talk about organizational culture because we come together to work as teams and where? Our organizations, most typically, right? But that doesn't mean we also don't meet up as in our civic organizations, if you're involved in local government or in all the hobbies and groups and clubs and churches and your friend groups and your family, right? So everything is connected ultimately. So take what you will from the conversation and apply it productively. And that's the whole point, right? At no point are we ever here to judge, right, or condemn, because we want to take the opportunity to grow and thrive. And anything we could do to make that easier, then let's do that. So today, people will test you with their baggage. What are we talking about? Well, you can look at this from many different angles, right? If you're an organization, if you're the owner or if you are the leader or support staff, leadership support staff at a site or broader, people can test you with their baggage, right? We're human beings, and a lot of times people will inherently bring to the workplace things in their personal life. And some things may be normal, right? Like, oh my gosh, a truck hit my garbage can. I had to pick up all the garbage you put it in, right? The normal stuff, right? The normal stuff that isn't so fun, right? But then there are some of the things that are a little bit more toxic and a little bit more difficult, right? If they have unhealthy relationships outside of work and then they emulate those coming to work, right? Unresolved issues, right? Unresolved uh, relational issues. And then if they bring that to work, and then what? Then they may impact their other team members, and then it will directly impact the customers being satisfied, and that will directly impact the customers being satisfied, right? So it's super important that we're aware of that. But it can also range in many different aspects, right? Because it could be codependence, right? Codependencies outside of work. It could be addictions outside of work. So many things, right? It could be bad habits. It could be as simple and as subtle as poor time management skills. Somebody comes to work and they aren't rested, right? They're not taking care of themselves, their physiology well, right? So there's a myriad of things that we bring to the table. Add to that, we've got the conditioning of our entire life history, right? So if you have unhealed wounds, parental wounds, and those sorts of things, or like I said before, relational wounds, then you're possibly apt to bring those to work, right? We can't rule that out. And how do we know this? Because we do see conflict in the workplace, right? And it's not just over, hey, red pencils or yellow pencils, right? They typically, conflict goes deeper. And also you see it in in their productivity and the quality of work, right? So again, all the dots are connected, all the dominoes, right? They flow in the direction that we push them, right? Or fail to guard them, right? So there's that aspect. But we can also see this from a different paradigm, right? We can see this from the team members' perspective, the broader team, right? Looking at the site leadership and the support staff now. Similarly, easy for me to say, similarly, bringing things from outside of work or poor work habits as well, right? Or they've been doing something so long that they're in their comfort zone. So maybe they don't engage, right? So, and maybe they have relational issues, codependencies and addictions, right? That have built up and they may be high functioning, right? Uh, but that they work with, or they try to, right? And then things slip through the cracks. And then that affects the team, right? Everything is connected, folks. And then that affects what? It affects the customers ultimately. So, and it might affect the likelihood that a site stays open, right? That affects who? All of this, if you're not serving your customers, then what? It can affect the community. It can affect families, right? It can disintegrate communities and families, right? So important to understand, right, that people will test you, right, with their baggage, right? And let's not get it twisted. We all have a level of baggage. There is a normative level of baggage, right? Just normal life hitting you from 1,000 different directions. You're running the kids to sports. Maybe you're taking classes, and you're working and you're doing all those things, and you can bring your stress level outside of work, even, right, to work, right? Because in accumulation, you're overscheduled, you're overbooked, you're oversaturated, as they used to call it, you're task saturated, right? When you become task saturated, you're going to miss some things, and some of those things could be, dangerous or harmful, right? Especially if you're working in dangerous environments, right? Or you're supervising or leading people who work in dangerous environments. If you're not considering all the elements and aspects of a particular function of what you do for work, right? Could be a million different examples. Insert here, right? So so we all bring levels, right, of our baggage to work. Most of it pretty normal for the most part, but it's not always the case. And it really depends on the season of life, experience. Newer employees are coming. They don't. Maybe the code of conduct and communication and all of that within the organization isn't very well spelled out, right? And so you may have folks come to work and they basically relaxed into treating the environment less professionally, more like their living room, right? And if people have been allowed to get away with treating people poorly, in their normative, let's say in their life, right? They may be in a circle of friends and family who just beat each other up, verbally and emotionally and all the things, right? And passive aggressively, and maybe even aggressively, sadly, right? But then they come to work, and then if some of this starts to slip into the bloodstream of the work environment, now you start to uh, poison the well, right? And that affects the customers, and then that can affect viability, and then that can also impact the community, right? Because when jobs are lost, that affects the community. You may affect, children going to school. It may affect people having to move to different locations. So now we've created a nomadic. The impact can be nomadic, creating a nomadic culture where there doesn't need to be one, because we're not addressing and staying on top of, checking ourselves before we wreck ourselves when it comes to our behavior within our organizations, right? Now you can flip it around, and you can take the same example and really point it at any group outside of, say, your work, right? And you can look at it the same way. And once you've seen, where a lot of times once you've noticed and you're aware that people are, say, being passive aggressive uh, or just being toxic to one another, right? Poor behavior, basically. Once you've seen that, once you understand that, once you get your hands wrapped around that concept, you really can't unsee and unknow it, right? And then, and what's the point then? Well, the point is to grow through this, right? So that's the awareness part of this, right? To be aware that this is the case. The second part of this is now what, right? What do we do to resolve it? Well, first of all, understand that this is, you may be in some conflict and a little bit of, you may be in conflict with people at the work site and so forth. Understand that if they're bringing things to work and they're frustrating, they're irritating other people, and they're doing things that aren't productive, right? And treating people poorly, that didn't start probably with that incident, right? It probably started 3 or 4 or 5 gates before that, right? It could have been an argument they had. It could be all these other things we talked about, all these other toxic things that can be put into somebody's life, and they be trying to juggle now toxic behaviors, right? Addictions and codependencies outside of work, and now now you're in a trying to figure out, trying to negotiate a resolution to some work stuff, and a person is just losing their mind, right? So understand this. But if you understand this, you understand that people are bringing that conditioning as well, right? That's the other aspect of this. They're bringing their paradigm of conditioning for many moons, right, to work. Well, now you're less apt to take personal affront to it, right? You're not going to be as insulted. Okay, now you may get insulted, right? But you're not going to feel as insulted because you know there's something going on behind the scenes. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it good, doesn't make it okay, shouldn't happen. But what you can do is you can kind of separate the emotion from the situation, understand it's like, oh, okay, somebody's got something, something's not, not well with the person right now, and they need to go talk to, leadership and so forth, right? But the point is, understand, folks, that everybody has life, right, that they bring into an organization. Again, though, organizations, same way. The organization itself could be perpetuating toxic behaviors, right? Because if I keep the workforce at odds with the site leadership, right, do you think they're thinking about a whole lot else? No, probably not. They're going to be tussling with one another. If they're tussling with one another, then they're not focused on the fact that, they're getting paid poorly and that the conditions are poor and unsafe, and all these things aren't getting addressed if they're worried about, office drama, right? So be aware of these things, folks. People will bring, they will test you, but will you pass the test? Will you pass the test? The test is not to react personally offended. The test is to understand where it's coming from, right? You may not know where it's coming from, but understand that there are layers behind it, right? And that it's not about you, right? They're not mad at you. They're not upset with you. The problem they have is not really with you. And this could also be site leadership and so on, right? Just like I said before, it's not about you. The test is not to react to that, right? Because there's no way you can get to resolution. If people are bringing, if you're walking onto any team, you're there to create wins for the customer, wins for your teammates, which will also result in wins for you. Win, win, win. If you aren't bringing that philosophy mindset, right, to create wins, then you won't get wins yourself. If you come into an organization or you're on any team and you're just trying to get wins for yourself, then it's not going to work out for everybody else, which is also going to reinforce, and it's not going to work out for you either. An example would be a basketball team. If a player on a basketball team, and I use this because of experience growing up, is trying to get their points and their stats in the stat sheet, then they're not focused on winning the game, right? And they're not focused on utilizing their team to win the game either, right? But if you focus on winning the game, you're going to what? Maximize everybody's engagement and involvement, right? Working together as a team. This is the whole idea behind teamwork, right? And then that will automatically make sure that your stat line is filled. It may not be filled exactly the way you want it, but it's going to be filled in the way that was necessary to win the game, right, folks? And winning the game is taking care of our customers. So just a quick one today, folks, on people will test you with their baggage. Pass the test, rise above it, ascend through it, learn from it, take the opportunity and see it as an opportunity to see the glass as half full and to continue to fill it, right? Not to dump it out, because that's just not good for anyone. All right, folks, hope you're having a fantastic day. Remember, hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day or more to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage one another. When you do this, not only are you helping to transform culture, but you're transforming your own life. But don't forget, you can't transform anything on the outside if you're not willing to transform on the inside. Super important. All right, folks, have a fantastic day. Hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.